Instagram is changing the way that it operates in order to protect teens and younger users. The Meta platform just unveiled a PG-13 parental control. I'm sure that got the attention of a lot of parents today. And to talk about these new features, we're speaking with technology expert Peter Tran. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Sure. Happy to be here.
Now, Peter, let's start with talking about these controls, which are loosely based on PG-13 ratings for films. How is this going to be helpful?
It's going to be helpful to set guardrails for individuals 13 and under, meaning that algorithms are going to be modified within the platform itself, because there's a lot of AI that's being used to identify content that's relevant to users. So when they start to curate those guardrails down to what's appropriate for 13 years or younger, those algorithms are going to be very specific to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And that's tricky. It's not as clear cut as it may seem. And when we're looking at social media platforms, and Facebook has already done this years before, as far as being able to curate content. It's not censorship, it's curating for appropriate content, for age appropriate. And so in this sense, what algorithms are being used, it could be anything from political content that may not be fact checked, for example. It could be AI content, deep fakes, other things that you see, the more 18 and over or 13 or 14 and over content, for example, that may a 13-year-old or younger may see that as real, right? Might have an effect on emotional health, might have effect on how much influence it has on the individual to the actions they may or may not take in school, how their social interactions may be affected. So that generally sets the appropriateness. And also, when it comes to acceptable use policies and the responsibilities that these companies need to take as far as risk management and also being able to have, social responsibility. That is important, especially on very highly engaged platforms like Instagram and Snapchat and others that have high volume, right? And so users can have a better experience generally that's appropriate to them overall.
Now, you are going to have parents who hear this and say, okay, I'm a little skeptical because it's likely that much of this, like policing of the content, is going to be up to the platform and any potential AI that helps to keep up with what the kids should see and what they shouldn't. How effective do you think this really has the potential to be?
It can be effective. It's nothing's 100% foolproof. For example, users can create dummy accounts or fake accounts. They're called Finstagrams, for example. That's the term acceptable term called fake Instagram accounts that they can pose as anybody they want. It's not verified. You don't have the verified check mark. It doesn't go through the same checks and balances. However, you can have those types of accounts, and whether they're 18 or not 18, um, the algorithms can determine that based on behaviors too. What's indicative of a user that might be a fake Instagram account, or the behavior of what typically would not be an 18 or over user that's using it purely for the social interactions. It might be more around just generally kind of stalking other accounts or maybe inciting potentially negative or malicious content between other users. It can generally hone in on that very quickly and put holds on accounts. You see that social media platforms oftentimes hold accounts or revoke accounts for violating acceptable use policy or community standards. So it can be effective. It will be effective, but it's not foolproof. So it sets I call them guardrails or lanes by which users will still have a good experience from the engagement across social media and Instagram, but at the same time, beyond those boundaries, it keeps a check and balance.
Now, you mentioned earlier in our conversation, Facebook has already been doing this. They've already started doing this already. So, why do you think that now Meta is just starting to make these adjustments?
Well, when Facebook first started, the user demographic was much younger. And
Hmm.
so it started there. And then now as generations start changing and their tastes have changed, Facebook now becomes somewhat of an older generation, more traditional user. And Instagram, Snap, and other platforms similar are high volume, high turnover, very quick, right? And that's very popular with current generations and generations coming up through. And social media platforms do make changes to their their engagement or their social interactions across the platform. So Instagram in the early days certainly has introduced other features and functions that are more relevant to this user demographic, which typically is much younger, under 13. So you notice that kids generally have smartphones by generally on average about sixth grade. About
Mhm.
12 years old is the average. And so they're starting to engage, and they probably had devices before that just on Wi-Fi, so not just a smartphone that's connected to a cellular network. So they do have to start to address that as they're seeing their user base um, grow. So you can usually see the attribution. You'll see TikTok users also use Instagram, also use Snap. So it's not just looking at Instagram, it's using at the entire portfolio that users of this generation or age bracket will tend to frequent. So that you see Reels and Shorts across YouTube even in that demographic. So they're taking caution because they're cross-populating content here. So they need to put guardrails down.
Now, this, of course, is a subjective question here, but is there something inherently wrong with social media at this point that we even need these types of restrictions in the first place?
Well, I think that from a um, from a general user perspective, social media has two distinct sides of its coin. One is there's an abundance of information and ways to connect in a very healthy, um, fun way. On the other side of it, it's a platform for potential nefarious activity. You get a lot of kind of phishing, cybercrime activities because there is an ad market on Instagram and all the other social media platforms, and also the types of behaviors that are usually elicited from that. So young children or children under the age of 13 that are still forming their brain functions, forming their, growing and maturing. Um, Oftentimes the content can be very influential, not in a positive way,
Mhm.
that can affect learning, cognitive skills, a lot of areas of normal developmental cycles that, you know, really the surge of information and the type of attention spans that needed for that is not necessarily healthy on long-term use and exposure. So the type of content, the frequency, the cross-platform nature of it becomes quite overwhelming from a youth perspective. Even as adults, right? There's a lot of information, so you can imagine that the curation or the guardrails, it provides some safety measures so that they can at least have the best user experience possible, minimize the types of content that might be very negative, and be able to make sure that there isn't undue exposure across that type of more mature content that necessarily is not fact checked, that don't know if it's real or not real. It could be very negative and nefarious in nature. It's something that we take harkens back to whether the movie ratings, right? It could be mature and rated R, PG-13, G-rated, PG-rated. Those were there for a reason back when you had content. So you can apply the same type of logic in the rules, but it's much faster, right? It's a higher rate of delivery across these platforms.
Now, earlier you did mention the average age of a child now getting a cell phone. They're in about sixth grade. But even still, that's the average age, right? It just feels like the ages of children getting that first phone is getting to a younger and younger age. Do you think that this will have any impact on those under the age of 13? Like, what will that impact look like?
The impact of the PG-13 controls, is that just to clarify?
Hmm.
Yeah, so it will have an impact in that both parents and child will have to actually communicate through this. I mean, that is the hope. Is when there are restrictions, the child will either try to find a way around it. And if there's not a way around it, and the parent is the governing partner in this to say, do I give you permission or do I not give you permission? It puts the responsibility on the parent and empowers the parent to hopefully communicate effectively with their child and explain to them why, explain to them the process, and hopefully those outcomes will help them have a healthier environment to be able to engage in social media. Because there are very positive aspects to social media, but when it's the Wild West, there are no rules, there are no guardrails or fences around that, then pretty much the stampedes happen, right, from data. It just keeps flowing in. And children under the age of 13 don't have those coping skills and coping mechanisms to really delineate. They're just bombarded.
And I mean, anything that's going to help improve communication between parents and children is always good. So, Peter, we really appreciate you. These changes we're talking about, they're set to roll out by the end of the year. So, who knows if there may be something else we end up talking to you about in terms of changes and just trying to make the online ecosystem safer for kids. But technology expert Peter Tran, we thank you so much for joining us. And I'll say until the next time, because you help us out with a lot of different things.
You're welcome. Great to be on.
Thank you, Peter.